exact camera. And she was going to take photos for her son so he wouldn't have to miss school the day that the President and the First Lady visited Dallas. She'd want to pull him out of school. So she was going to take pictures. Well, as the shots were fired, Mormon took a photo at the exact moment President Kennedy was hit with the third shot. Mormon also witnessed the first and second shots, and later stated to reporters, "I heard Jackie yell, 'My God, he's been shot.' I saw his hair jump, but it wasn't just his hair, it was part of his head." She took a photo, and I'm going to pass this around to you real quick, like. She took this photo, which is the only other photo taken of the president when the fatal shot was taken. It's pretty grainy, not a great photo, but this is a photo she took. And she was standing next to Gene Hill, and you can see the picture of him in Daly Plaza right here. And she had a red raincoat on, thus the name Lady in Red, and Gene Hill was the other lady in the photograph. They were from Casey to me, from the third shot on the opposite side. The limousine would have been coming this way, and they were from Casey or Sage to me from the third shot, maybe closer. And Marianne Mormon got a picture of that. Well, going back to our story, as the presidential motorcade sped to Parkland Hospital, at 12:33 p.m., the telephone rang in the emergency room at Parkland. So the presidential limousine is heading towards Parkland. It's 12:33, and the phone rings in the emergency room of Parkland Hospital. A registered nurse by the name of Doris Nelson answered the phone. So again, as the presidential limousine is flying towards Parkland Hospital, at 12:33 p.m. the phone rings in the emergency room at Parkland, and registered nurse Doris Nelson answers the phone. And she's later quoted as saying the following: "The operator told me the president had been shot. I thought she was joking and asked her, 'What else is new?' But then, from the tone of her voice, I knew she wasn't kidding. She said the president's motorcade was on its way to Parkland." Well, at 12:34 p.m., the United Press International, anybody know what that is? You ever heard of the Associated Press or the AP? You get an AP bulletin or an AP report, Associated Press. Well, the United Press International was simply another media outlet that they went more commonly by UPI. You either got a UPI report or you got an AP report, okay? Well, at 12:34 p.m., the United Press International transmitted a 12-word bulletin that went across the world. Teletype. If you look up behind Casey, you'll see some original teletype from the Miles City Star in Miles City, Montana, that explain the same thing we're talking about today. That's worth probably $1,000. Those are original teletypes off the teletype machines that came out at the time. Here was the 12-word bulletin. I want you to write down all 12 words. This was the first bulletin that came out in either the UPI or the AP after the president had been shot. And it came out at 12:34, and this is what the 12 words said. 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. That information to UPI had to come from someone. And it had to be somebody that was on the ground, so to speak, right? That was close to the president's assassination. Well, it happened to come from a UPI reporter by the name of Merriman Smith. So the UPI got their information to transmit this 12-word bulletin across the world, becoming the first to do so, from a White House reporter, UPI reporter Merriman Smith. Now, where was Smith to get this information? He was the 5th car behind the president's limousine. So, there were 5 cars behind the president's limousine and more things, but he was in the 5th car that was behind the president's limousine. And his car was directly in front of the only radio telephone in the vicinity. So what does he do? As soon as he knows what's going on, what does he do? He gets on that radio telephone in that car directly behind him, and he reports the following back to UPI, which leads to this 12-word bulletin. This is what Merriman Smith says to UPI from that car phone in the motorcade. You don't have to write this down. He said, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas. Some of the Secret Service agents thought the gunfire was from an automatic weapon fired to the right rear of the president's car, probably from a grassy knoll to which the police rushed. So as a result, this guy right here, Merriman Smith, becomes the inventor of the famous what? Grassy knoll. He invented or coined that phrase. So again, he reports to UPI, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas, which turns out to be the 12-word bulletin that goes across the world, the first news correspondence of the assassination, and continues to tell him some of the Secret Service agents thought the gunfire was from an automatic weapon fired to the right rear of the president's car, probably from a, quote, grassy knoll to which police rushed. As a result, Merriman Smith was the person who originally coined the phrase grassy knoll. Okay? Pretty important person. Now, we got to keep thinking about what's happening because everything's happening crazy. At the same time, at 12:34, 3 members of President Kennedy's cabinet were on an airplane on their way to Tokyo, Japan. 3 key members of Kennedy's cabinet were not in Dallas or not in Washington. They were on an airplane heading to Tokyo, Japan, because they were going to a trading conference there. The 3 cabinet members of importance that were on this airplane on the way to Japan for a trading conference were Secretary of State Dean Rusk, Treasury Secretary C. Douglas Dillon, and Press Secretary Pierre Salinger. So as the president has been assassinated, 4 minutes later, on an airplane heading to Tokyo, Japan for a trading conference were 3 key members of Kennedy's cabinet. Secretary of State Dean Rusk, Treasury Secretary C. Douglas Dillon, and Press Secretary Pierre Salinger. Now this is where my life gets crazy. This was not my notes till about 15 years ago. Also present on the airplane was a fellow by the name of Robert Manning. Robert Manning. And Robert Manning had a weird title. He was the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. Robert Manning was also on that airplane. And Robert Manning was the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs, which doesn't mean a damn thing when you really think about it. However, 15 years ago it started to matter. Or maybe it was 20. Remember that UPI bulletin that came across the UPI machines? Everybody had them. Well, that UPI bulletin also came on the teletype in that airplane. That airplane was equipped with a UPI, AP, teletype. And it was just a big machine that when news had come across, it'd go and it'd tell you all kinds of news. Well, that 12-word bulletin of the events in Dallas comes over that airplane's teletype also. And it just so happens that Robert Manning is the guy that's sent to retrieve that message from the teletype machine. And again, the message is 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade today in downtown Dallas. Well, Manning retrieves that teletype and he hands it to Secretary of State Rusk. And all of a sudden, Rusk, Dillon, Salinger, and everybody else on the airplane know what? That the president's motorcade has been fired upon. Now, this is where it's crazy. I bring that up because 15 or 20 years ago, I'm sitting in class exactly like we're sitting. Just talking about things, not this necessarily. And I look out my door and Pat Pearson is kind of looking in my door. Pat was a parent of kids that we had in the school. They were elementary kids, but Pat was an outfitter. He took people fishing from out of state and hunting and all that. And he looks in and he says, he's a very quiet guy. So I walk out there and he's got this guy with him. And he said, hey, I want to introduce you to this client of mine. He's out here fishing from back east. You might be interested in it. And I said, okay. I thought, what is that? I said, what's his name? He said his name is Robert Manning. And you might want to hear his story. So this guy walks into the class and tells you just what I told you. That he was on the airplane, that he was the guy that tore off the teletype and handed it to Secretary of State Rusk. I couldn't believe it. So we take a picture. Now this is how dang long ago this was. This is a Polaroid picture from one of those Polaroid cameras. And this is Robert Manning and myself. I guess I can tell you what it was because he signed this book for me. It was April 24th of 2002. So how many years ago was that? 15 almost? 16 almost. And he signed this book for me because this is a book he wrote that has nothing to do with this. But I'll pass this around. There is Robert Manning and myself at Robert's school. And he was the man that tore off the teletype and gave it to Dean Rusk on that airplane. Anyway, well, once they figured out what happened, Press Secretary Pierre Salinger got on a phone and he wanted to place a call to the Situation Room in the White House, which is where they decide things. And so he calls the Situation Room in the White House. And somebody answers the phone, and this is what he says to the person that answers the phone in the Situation Room at the White House. He said, please listen hard. This plane on which Secretary of State Rusk and other cabinet members are heading for Japan is turning around and returning to Honolulu. Will arrive there in approximately 2 hours. Any other information, please get as quickly as possible. So what he's telling the Situation Room in the White House is, hey, we know about the assassination attempt. We are going to turn this plane around and go back to Honolulu. If you hear anything about the president and or his condition, let us know. Oh, for the next 30 minutes, from like 12:34 or 35 till little after 1, there was nothing but silence on the radio. Does that make sense? Finally, at 1 o'clock, a voice comes over the speaker system from the White House Situation Room. And it says, Wayside, stand by. Wayside, stand by. Wayside, stand by. Every 30 seconds for several minutes, they listened at that radio and it would say, Wayside, stand by. And 30 seconds would go by. Wayside, stand by. 30 seconds would go by. Wayside, stand by. Keep that in mind. Okay, now, we'll talk about the Zapruder film. Okay? There were a lot of people filming the motorcade that day in downtown Dallas. A lot of people. But only one person had a full recording of the assassination. And his name was Abraham Zapruder. And he was a dress manufacturer in Dallas. So of all the cameras and video cameras and whatnot that went on that day during that assassination, only one person had a full recording. Abraham Zapruder, who was a dress manufacturer in Dallas. Well, the morning of November 22nd, 1963, Zapruder arrives at his place of business, which was the Dow Tex building in Dallas. Now, if you look at this handout right here, this is the Dallas County Courthouse, this is the Texas School Book Depository, this is the Dow Tex building right here. This is where he worked, so he was right down in the middle of things. It was right across the street from the Texas School Book Depository. And when he arrived at work that morning, he did not have his 8mm Bell & Howell movie camera. Didn't have it with him. Came to work without his camera. What a dumb move. The president's coming like right down, right, by where he's working. And he's probably never going to come there ever again. And so Zapruder's assistant, a gal by the name of Marilyn Sitzman, convinces Zapruder to go home and get his 8mm Bell & Howell camera so he could film the event, so he could show people like his children and grandchildren down the road. So he took his advice and he went home and got his camera. This is the exact camera in which Abraham Zapruder filmed this film. This is an 8mm Bell & Howell. It's kind of weird. You wind it up and you look in it like this and you push the button and run and it films. Now, this film is not, doesn't make any difference, so I'm actually going to open this up and show you. This is kind of cool because this has a full roll of film in it. But this is what it looked like. Okay? You put the film in, you shut it, you lock it, you take this out, wind it up, you got to get the motor running, so to speak, and there's a button right down here, and you look in the viewfinder and just push it down, and that's what it does. It takes videos. This is what the old video cameras look like. I'll pass that around, you guys can look at that. Well, when he returns back with this camera, he asked, Abraham Zapruder asked Marilyn Sitzman if she would go with him to Daley Plaza to see the President and First Lady. And in Daley Plaza, he positioned himself on top of a 4-foot concrete block on the grassy knoll. I'll show you that later. But it's a block about this high, about 4 feet high, and it's probably about twice as wide. If you put two of these desk fronts together, that's about what it'd be. And he got up and stood on top of that 4-foot concrete block and pointed down Elm Street so he could see the exact turn onto Elm and the president coming basically kind of right at him down Elm Street. So he'd be here and the president's limousine is going to come just like this, so he's going to follow him all the way down Elm Street. Now, Zapruder suffered from vertigo, and he would really get dizzy when on elevated ground. So what Marilyn Sitzman did basically is stood on the pillar behind him and held on to his waist so he didn't get dizzy and fall off this 4-foot concrete block when he was filming. That's what she did. Well, as the president's limousine approached him, Abraham Zapruder films the entire assassination. And you will get a chance to see that from every angle possible tomorrow, and everything from fast motion to slow motion. Okay? And that's what we'll start with tomorrow, is the Zapruder film. All right. You won't believe it.